Good morning, DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams. We are live here in New Orleans at the Media Headquarters Hotel, just across the street from Georgia's headquarter hotel. And we've obviously arrived at game day for the Sugar Bowl, going off at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. local here. And we wanted to take a moment here in kind of an impromptu, not an official full version of DawgNation Daily, but in kind of an impromptu way, just sort of update everything that we've learned since we have last spoken and kind of lay the groundwork for what it's going to look like inside the Louisiana Superdome later on today. Let me start with this. You know, obviously, when the announcement came that the Sugar Bowl is going to be postponed yesterday, not taking place at its originally scheduled time of 8:45 Eastern, 7:45 Central game on New Year's Day, a lot of folks kind of wondered, well, how both of these teams would handle the longer layoff and the need to be in their hotel for a longer period of time. And what we know is both Georgia and Notre Dame took slightly different approaches to all of this. We'll show you video on the screen here of Georgia. They announced, actually, they made an official announcement about this. They would have a walkthrough yesterday evening. That announcement coming from Georgia shortly after 5 p.m. local time. And then shortly after that, we did see, and you'll see these images on the screen, Georgia leaving its team hotel, getting into buses, and going to go through a walkthrough ahead of that game. This, we would believe, was done for a couple of reasons here. Reason number one, obviously, that is a long time to stay in a hotel. If you'll remember, earlier this week, we had a chance to talk to former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm, and we're kind of asking Jake about his experience in playing in college football playoff games and actually playing in a couple of Sugar Bowls. And the one thing that Jake said was, when you wake up on game day knowing, and the tradition on New Year's Day is, the Rose Bowl kind of likes its late afternoon start. The Sugar Bowl kind of likes its primetime start. Those are sort of your January 1st, New Year's Day fixtures on the bowl calendar. So when you play in a Sugar Bowl, you've gotten very used to very late starts. And so Jake was telling us, being in New Orleans, knowing you've gotten to game day, but the game is really so much later than any of the other games you play. Typical to play night games in college football, of course, but those are usually like 7:30, 8 p.m. kicks. The Sugar Bowl scheduled kick would have been 8:45, and obviously with the potential delay in the Rose Bowl, even later than that when it kicked off. Jake was saying, from a player's perspective, it ends up just being an incredibly long day to wait in the hotel room while that's happening. And yesterday, while Georgia players were obviously kind of preparing for that long wait that Jake described, they also found out that the game itself would be postponed for another day too. And so Georgia made the decision to get its guys out of the hotel, give them a chance to stretch their legs, give them a chance to kind of go through another walkthrough. And you would presume that some of this was, you know, perhaps just sort of burn off the energy that builds up when you're kind of locked in a hotel for as long as Georgia was and all of that. I was also told that, you know, some of that too could be about trying to maintain as normal a schedule as possible so that the team would kind of go to bed at a consistent time, the way that it would typically would before a game, and just sort of keep that kind of I don't call it circadian rhythm necessarily, or just body clock, kind of keep that in sort of the same rhythm of get out, go to a walkthrough, come on back to the hotel. At that point in time, you know, perhaps your body is telling you, okay, then now you're tired and it's time to sort of drift off to sleep, as opposed to if you've ever laid around the house all day, sometimes, you know, it's a little bit hard to kind of go to bed at a normal time after that because your body hasn't maybe moved around enough. That is what Georgia was choosing to do here, getting out there and just kind of sort of staying in a little bit of a football rhythm around all of that. If you were noticing the buses leaving on that video a moment ago, one of the things you'll also know, and perhaps this gives you a little bit of peace of mind, our hotel right across the street from where Georgia's staying, and I think all of us can say it's essentially been like a fortress around here that obviously we're aware of what happened on early January 1st, very, very late on New Year's Eve for those who were still out partying. But in the aftermath of that, the police presence around the Georgia team hotel and the media hotel, which is where we are, it's been obviously quite apparent. Many, many police cars all over the place. Georgia last night essentially slept in what was, for all intents and purposes, a fortress with police cars all around that hotel. And that was certainly evident as the team pulled out to go work out a little bit last night, kind of already dark, just after 5 p.m. local time. They were gone for about an hour and a half, so not a very long workout, but just enough to sort of do the, I guess, traditional pregame stretch, pregame routine, take care of some of that, and try to stay in as normal a rhythm as possible ahead of today's game. As I mentioned, Notre Dame, we are told from their people, took a slightly different tack yesterday. Notre Dame did not leave its hotel at all. They stayed in. They did have team meetings, and one of the things that, if you've ever been around a team hotel for a big game, we right now are in what is essentially converted convention hall space, ballroom type space. That's where we are. Most big hotels have big, spacious rooms like that. And for the most part, the teams that come in for these games essentially take over all that meeting space, and that becomes just sort of theirs, and their offense, defense, special teams get their meetings together. And so Notre Dame would essentially, I'm assuming, have full control of almost all the ballroom space in the hotel that it's staying in. And so they were having those meetings, and they did put together what I think is being described as a team run inside that facility. This is a little bit similar to sometimes NBA teams will do this. When they're traveling on the road or they don't have time to get to a gym for a practice. Obviously, there's no basketball goals, but they'll put a duct tape on the floor and kind of create a key, a half court, something that sort of looks like a painted area of a basketball floor, and they'll do a little bit of a walkthrough inside of a ballroom. So you can at times, some of these rooms are spacious enough that you can do some of that if you want to. And it sounds like Notre Dame did get a little blood flowing with a team run inside of its hotel yesterday. But unlike Georgia, they did not leave the hotel. Georgia briefly leaving that hotel yesterday a little bit after 5 p.m. local time, getting a stretch in, getting a pregame, basically just a pregame walkthrough, another one of those. Very, very light. Team, as it left, was dressed in sweat clothes and it's kind of, windsuit type apparel, and they were gone for a little bit, then came back, and then presumably trying to get as good a night's sleep as they possibly could. Of course, the other big chatter that has gone on as far as the game is concerned since we last spoke is the back channel discussions about when this game would be played and the various, constituencies that had opinions on that. If you want to go back to yesterday morning, even in the light of the terrible tragedy that we've obviously all been, dealing with in our own way, it certainly seemed like yesterday morning the energy here locally was around this game being played and in some form or fashion, on January 1st, the scheduled time. Over the course of the day, though, certainly it became obvious that was likely not going to be able to happen. And so the discussion was ongoing. If it did get moved here today on January 2nd, on Thursday, when it would be played. Clearly, as has been reported in many places, I think probably most prominently by Ross Dellinger, both of the coaches, Georgia's Kirby Smart, Notre Dame's Marcus Freeman, both desired as early a start as possible to this game. You will know that Kirby Smart, when he thinks about kind of recovery time between games, he doesn't think in terms of the number of days. For instance, we would say, hey, Georgia plays typically on a Saturday. Its next game is 7 days away. Kirby Smart doesn't really think in terms of days. Kirby Smart, we're told by people who obviously know well, would say that Kirby thinks in terms of hours. So if you've already got a situation where the winner of the Fiesta Bowl has gotten a little bit of a head start on you, if you're the winner for the semifinal game to take place in Miami, in this case it's Penn State, obviously, that the earlier the game, it's maybe the same number of days, but it's an additional number of hours that Georgia, or if Notre Dame were to win, the Fighting Irish, an additional number of hours you would get for that preparation. So both Kirby and Marcus Freeman wanted the game to be as early as possible. It seems like somebody somewhere maybe wanted the game to be at the original start time that it was supposed to be, but ultimately maybe you split the difference here or come to some sort of compromise. We eventually arrive at, and this was finally confirmed later yesterday evening, that the game will kick off for you at 4 p.m. Eastern time if you're in Georgia, and for those of us here in Louisiana, that is a 3 p.m. Central Time game. I think one of the discussions that's going to be had is what it's going to look like inside the Superdome a little bit later on. We've shown you a video of this week to kind of give you a little bit of an idea of this venue, for whatever reason, and from a capacity standpoint, it's essentially the same size as almost any other stadium in the NFL. They're all pretty close to the same seating capacity. But for me, the inside of the Superdome just looks cavernous. I don't know why. It just looks on the inside so much bigger than many of the other stadiums that we go to. I'm guessing, I've never attended a game here at the Superdome as a fan. I'm guessing for some fans, perhaps the sight lines maybe not great, because it seems like the seats sort of extend far back away from the field, especially if you're in like the 25, 30-yard line range. It just seems like some of those seats just sort of extend a little farther back to create a stadium that just looks bigger on the inside than many of the other more modern stadiums, which have a little bit tighter, sight lines, I guess, trying to get folks a little closer to the field. The reason why I'm saying all that is that I do believe the game change is going to have an impact on what it looks like inside the stadium. This is already a pretty wide, big, spread out stadium. I believe today a lot of that space will also be empty seats. That when we first got the news yesterday about the postponement, I can tell you that here in our hotel lobby, there were folks in some cases trying to extend their room and stay for additional day. But we also saw a good number of folks and these were in most cases just regular fans, either of Georgia or Notre Dame, that were having to leave. And the reasons that people leave, in some cases, it could be financial related. It's obviously expensive to stay here for an additional day. There could be an additional expense if you're trying to change a flight, things like that, extend a rental car, something along those lines. A lot of that can be, some expense. But there's also just the general scheduling issues that come up. This is in many ways more serious than many of the kind of hurricane-style postponements that perhaps we've seen in the past. But it has always struck me in those situations. I can go back to 2016 when Georgia played South Carolina on a Sunday. I can think of instances involving LSU where when a game gets moved to a Sunday, when it gets moved to a different week, I'm always interested in the fact that these SEC stadiums that are completely full, literally for every single game that's regularly scheduled for a Saturday, when it's a different game time, a different, just when there's a date change or a time change, something like that, oftentimes that creates a lot more empty seats in that stadium than would otherwise take place. My expectation is today we will see more empty seats in the Superdome than we would have seen had the game taken place last night. In fact, I believe our Cody Chaffins was telling us that he's seen some information from the airport that the airport here in New Orleans is pretty packed with both Georgia and Notre Dame fans that are, for their own, I guess, various reasons, forced to go back here today. So there are, of course, plenty of fans who are staying. We were out and about a little bit last night, did go out and get some dinner, and just tried to, I guess, make the most of our time here, and got to eat somewhere. So we did step out to go get a little dinner last night, and still saw plenty of fans. And if you get away from Bourbon Street, going more towards like where the Caesars Casino is or something like that, you can find a certain degree of normalcy that still exists here around New Orleans. But the closer you get to where Bourbon Street is, obviously that becomes a very, very different scene. So there are still plenty of fans, including in our own hotel right now. But there will be fewer of those because for some people, travel just makes that just a necessity. You just essentially have to do that. To make it about the football here for a moment, one of the things we've also seen is a little bit of a change in the point spread as of late. You may have noticed that within the last 24 hours or so, we've seen a pretty heavy move in the direction of the Irish. Prominent sports books now have Notre Dame favored by 1.5 here in this spot. Why that is obviously not always an easy thing to sometimes these point spread moves can be a little bit nonsensical. But if you had to make some educated guesses about why there is a heavy move in favor of Notre Dame right now, you can look at the 3 previous quarterfinal games we've already seen. Arizona State fought gallantly against Texas. Ultimately, it lost. Oregon had beaten Ohio State in its first meeting, went undefeated in the regular season, won the Big Ten, but was defeated handily yesterday at the hands of Ohio State. And in the other quarterfinal game that took place on Tuesday night, you also saw Penn State, fresh off its win in the first round against SMU, stay hot again and beat Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl. In other words, all 3 of the teams that were given byes because of their conference champion status, none of those teams as of yet has won in the quarterfinals. The last chance for a bye team, a team that received a bye in the quarterfinals to win, is Georgia. Is that perhaps why the point spread movement in the direction of the Irish, the fact that thus far the extra rest not proving to be all that valuable for the teams that have gotten it, and the old debate about rest versus rust, perhaps do we see a rustier version of Arizona State or Boise State or Oregon than we otherwise would have seen? Ultimately, this stuff becomes very difficult to know. But that is the trend thus far in these quarterfinals, that the teams that played in the first round also went on to win in the quarterfinals, and so perhaps that's causing some of the folks in the betting public to line up on the side of Notre Dame here in this spot and going against Georgia, who obviously we would say probably got some much-needed rest over the course of the last few weeks, but obviously a trend kind of working against UGA, at least based on the way these quarterfinals have looked. So that's sort of the stage here and how things are looking in New Orleans for now. An afternoon start for Georgia and Notre Dame. Obviously, a lot of folks looking forward to making their way over there and trying to, in the midst of a chaotic scene here in New Orleans, try to return to some sense of normalcy. And, of course, here at DawgNation, you'll recognize that as well over the course of the next couple of hours. Our reporting going to really shift to what's going to happen in the game. The next time you see us on video, we'll be inside the Superdome. Kaylee Manziel is going to anchor our pregame video coverage there. That's going to be a description and an explanation for what's actually happening there on the field in the stadium as it kind of becomes about the game there at that point in time. And then I'll be looking forward to speaking to you after the game as a part of our DawgNation post-game show, and hopefully in the midst of all of this, talking about Georgia advancing to the college football playoff semifinals and getting ready to take a trip to Miami to take on Penn State. By the way, speaking of that, a lot of folks have kind of wondered, well, you know, given the fact that the game that Georgia would be slated to go to is the earlier of the two semifinal games, was there some possibility of flip-flop and moving the Miami game back a day and the game that would be scheduled to take place in Texas up a day? Doesn't seem like there's really any energy around that right now, that, you know, these cities have their schedules already set and their plans are kind of based on the game taking place at a certain date and time. So it seems like the semifinal spot will be locked in. Obviously, the opponent for one of these two teams already locked in as well, that being Penn State. And now this afternoon, Georgia and Notre Dame will battle to find out who gets that spot there. So hopefully today for you, you're able to get off of work or find a spot and a way to watch this game, and it matches your schedule in some form somehow. And obviously around here, we're looking forward to getting back to a more normal version of DawgNation Daily very soon here. But Happy New Year. Welcome to 2025, and let's settle in for some Georgia football later on this afternoon. Thanks for being with us here this morning.